London, 1884. Snow drifted softly beyond the towering windows of Blackthorn Castle, turning the ancient grounds into a silver dream. Inside, however, winter held no power. Hundreds of candles blazed beneath crystal chandeliers. Violins sang from a raised gallery. Silk gowns swept across polished marble floors while noblemen exchanged laughter over glasses of imported wine. It was the grand midwinter ball, one of the most anticipated events of the season. The aristocracy had arrived from every corner of England. Dukes, earls, viscounts, ladies draped in jewels worth entire estates. Every smile glittered. Every conversation concealed calculation. And among them moved a woman nobody was meant to notice. She carried a silver tray balanced carefully between trembling hands. Her servant's uniform was plain black. Her shoes were worn. Her sleeves had been mended more than once. Yet no humble garment could entirely conceal the grace she possessed. Even hardship had failed to erase her beauty. Dark chestnut hair was pinned beneath a servant's cap. Her pale features appeared thinner than they once had been. Shadows rested beneath her eyes from countless sleepless nights. Most noticeable of all was the gentle curve beneath her apron. She was visibly pregnant. The woman kept her gaze lowered as she moved through the ballroom. Years earlier she had danced beneath these very chandeliers. Now she served beneath them. Such were the cruel amusements of fate. Whispers often traveled faster than truth in English society, but tonight nobody paid attention to the servant carrying wine among the guests. At least not yet. The young woman focused only on surviving another evening. One more tray. One more hour. One more night. That was how she measured life now. Not in seasons. Not in dreams. Only in endurance. Near midnight the ballroom reached its height of splendor. Music swelled. Couples spun gracefully. Footmen carried silver platters overflowing with delicacies. The heat from hundreds of candles mixed with the scent of roses decorating every column and staircase. Suddenly a sharp pain twisted through the servant's lower back. Her breath caught. Instinctively one hand drifted toward her stomach. The child moved. A reminder that she was no longer struggling only for herself. She steadied her breathing and continued walking. But exhaustion had been stalking her for months. Hunger. Long hours. Winter cold. The endless burden of carrying both grief and new life. Eventually even the strongest soul must falter. As she crossed the center of the ballroom, dizziness struck. The chandeliers blurred. Voices became distant. The marble floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her fingers weakened. The tray slipped. Crystal shattered across the floor. The crash echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Music stopped instantly. Conversations died. Hundreds of faces turned. For a moment there was complete silence. Then came the laughter. A sharp, cruel sound. A noble woman standing nearby looked down at the broken glass with visible disgust. "Good heavens," she said loudly. "Must they employ clumsy creatures in this castle now?" Several guests chuckled. The servant froze. Color drained from her face. She immediately knelt despite her condition, gathering fragments with shaking hands. "I beg your pardon, my lady." Her voice was soft, respectful, humiliated. The noblewoman's eyes drifted toward the woman's swollen belly. A sneer touched her painted lips. Perhaps carrying children and carrying trays should not be attempted simultaneously. The surrounding guests laughed again, this time more openly. The servant lowered her head further. Years ago she had faced gossip from society. But cruelty somehow hurt more when one no longer possessed rank enough to defend herself. She concentrated on gathering the shattered crystal. One piece sliced her finger. A bright drop of blood appeared. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody except one man. At the far end of the ballroom stood the master of Blackthorn Castle. The Duke, tall, imposing, dressed in black evening attire that reflected both wealth and authority. For most of the evening he had entertained diplomats and noble guests. Yet the sound of breaking glass drew his attention. He turned casually, then stopped. Everything seemed to vanish from his expression. The laughter, the conversation, the ballroom itself. His eyes locked upon the kneeling servant, and the world ceased to exist, because he knew that face, even after 2 years, even after anger, even after betrayal. He knew it instantly. His former wife, the woman he had once loved beyond reason, the woman he had divorced, the woman who had disappeared from his life without a trace. She slowly lifted her eyes. Their gazes met. The color vanished from her face completely. Neither moved. Neither spoke. 1,000 memories passed silently between them. Wedding vows. Summer gardens. Shared laughter. Promises whispered beside candlelight. Then came the darker memories. Accusations. Tears. Forged evidence. The final day their marriage died. The Duke felt something strike his chest with brutal force. Not because she stood before him, but because he finally noticed what everyone else had already seen. The child she carried. His eyes dropped instinctively to her stomach, then rose again. A terrible possibility formed inside his mind. The room around them blurred. The years between them vanished. And for the first time since their marriage ended, genuine fear entered the Duke's heart. Because if his calculations were correct, the child growing beneath her heart could only belong to one man. Him. The days that followed the ball unfolded beneath a sky of iron-gray clouds and drifting snow. Blackthorn Castle remained magnificent as ever, its towers rising above the winter landscape like a monument to power, yet something unseen had shifted within its ancient walls. The Duke carried that change with him wherever he went. He could not forget the look on her face. Every conversation faded before it reached his ears. Every meeting seemed pointless. Every document placed upon his desk became meaningless ink. Again and again, his thoughts returned to the servant who had once been his wife, and to the child she carried. The possibility haunted him. Not because he feared scandal, because he feared hope. For 2 years he had convinced himself that his marriage had been a tragic mistake born from misplaced trust. Believing that had been easier than facing the pain of losing her. Now certainty was beginning to crack. The Duke found himself noticing details he should never have noticed. From distant corridors he watched her work. She moved carefully now, one hand often resting against her lower back. The pregnancy was advancing. Fatigue lingered in every step she took. Yet she never complained. Never asked for sympathy. Never sought attention. Instead she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had once made him fall hopelessly in love. One snowy afternoon he passed through the servants' wing on an invented errand. The corridor was empty. A door stood slightly open. Inside she sat alone beside a small fire. The room was painfully modest. A narrow bed. A wooden chair. A tiny washstand. Nothing else. No luxury. No comfort. No trace remained of the elegant life she had once known. She lowered her gaze toward something resting in her hands. The Duke paused. A silver glimmer caught the firelight. His breath stopped. It was a locket. The same locket he had given her on the morning of their wedding. He remembered fastening it around her neck beneath blooming roses. He remembered her smiling through tears of happiness. He remembered her promise. I shall wear it until my last breath. Now years later she still did. Despite everything. Despite him. The realization struck harder than any accusation. A woman does not preserve such a token if love has entirely died. The Duke stepped away before she noticed him. But the image remained burned into his thoughts. That evening he gave discreet instructions to a trusted servant. No names were mentioned. No explanations offered. A basket was prepared. Fresh bread. Fruit. Medicine. Warm blankets. Everything a pregnant woman might require during winter. After midnight the basket was left outside her door. The Duke waited in a nearby corridor hidden by shadows. Eventually the door opened. She emerged carrying a candle. For several seconds she stared at the gifts. Her expression softened. Not with surprise. Recognition. She knew exactly who had sent them. Slowly she knelt beside the basket. Her fingers brushed the blanket. Then tears gathered in her eyes. For a moment the Duke believed she might accept the offering. Instead she carefully carried everything to the castle chapel. At dawn he discovered the basket redistributed among poor villagers who sought shelter there. She had kept nothing. Not a single item. Pride still stood between them. And perhaps something even stronger. But meanwhile the castle had begun to whisper. Servants noticed the Duke's attention. Guests noticed his silence whenever her name arose. Observant eyes connected details. Speculation spread like wildfire through dry grass. Within days gossip infected every drawing room. Some claimed the Duke maintained a secret mistress. Others insisted the former Duchess had returned to blackmail him. Several noblewomen invented even darker stories. The truth mattered little. Society preferred entertainment. One afternoon the rumors erupted openly during a formal luncheon attended by influential guests. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandelier light. Silver utensils reflected candle flames. Conversation drifted lazily from politics to marriage. Then a widowed countess smiled maliciously. I hear the former Duchess has found employment among the servants. Several guests laughed politely. Another woman added, a remarkable decline. though perhaps suitable punishment for certain indiscretions. The Duke remained silent. The Countess continued, "I confess I pity the child. Growing up without a respectable father must be terribly unfortunate." The room stirred with amusement. Then the Duke slowly set down his wineglass. The sound echoed across the table. Instant silence followed. His gaze settled upon the Countess. Cold, controlled, dangerous. The kind of silence that precedes a storm. "Lady Ashcombe," he said calmly, "you presume much concerning matters that do not concern you." The Countess stiffened. Nobody spoke. The Duke's voice remained perfectly measured. "Allow me to be clear. Any person who speaks of that woman with disrespect shall answer directly to me." The words landed like thunder. Several guests lowered their eyes immediately. Others stared in astonishment. The Countess flushed crimson. The Duke rose and departed without another word. By evening the entire castle knew what had happened. The rumors did not stop. They multiplied. Now people wondered why the Duke defended her at all. Late that night, unable to sleep, he wandered through administrative offices rarely visited by noblemen. Snow tapped softly against the windows while candlelight flickered across neglected shelves. A stack of discarded correspondence waited for disposal. One document slipped free and fell onto the floor. The Duke bent to retrieve it. His eyes narrowed. It was a physician's report. A routine medical record. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then he noticed the date. His pulse quickened. He read again. And again. The report confirmed exactly how far along her pregnancy had been during an examination months earlier. The calculation formed instantly. His hands began trembling. The timeline aligned perfectly with the final weeks of their marriage. Perfectly. There could be no mistake. The child had been conceived before their separation, before the divorce, before she disappeared. The Duke stared at the paper while 1,000 emotions collided inside him. Hope, guilt, fear. Yet as he continued examining the forgotten records, another document caught his attention. A letter attached beneath the physician's report. Its signature belonged to a former household secretary dismissed shortly after the divorce. The handwriting looked strangely familiar. The Duke stepped closer to the candlelight and felt ice spread through his veins. Because for the first time he recognized evidence that someone had deliberately forged the documents that destroyed his marriage. The discovery shattered whatever certainty remained within the Duke's heart. For 2 sleepless nights he studied every document connected to the collapse of his marriage. Old letters were retrieved from locked cabinets. Financial records surfaced from forgotten archives. Testimonies once accepted without question were examined again beneath the harsh light of truth. The deeper he searched, the uglier the picture became. Names emerged. Motives emerged. Lies emerged. A former secretary had altered correspondence. A jealous relative had funded the deception. 2 influential families had quietly encouraged the scheme because they had never approved of his marriage. Piece by piece the past rebuilt itself. Not as he remembered it, but as it truly had been. By the 3rd evening, snow blanketed the castle grounds in silent white. The winter garden stood almost deserted beyond the main wing of the estate. Glass walls enclosed sleeping roses and frost-covered vines. Lanterns cast golden pools of light upon stone pathways winding through the conservatory. It was there he asked her to meet him. The message was formal, respectful, brief. She almost refused. Almost. Yet something inside her demanded answers she had spent 2 years trying to bury. When she entered the winter garden, the Duke was already waiting. He stood beside an iron bench beneath a canopy of glass. For several moments neither spoke. The silence carried too many memories. Once they had shared every thought. Now they struggled even to meet each other's eyes. The Duke noticed how pale she appeared. The pregnancy had advanced noticeably. Fatigue shadowed her features. Yet she remained beautiful. Not with the polished perfection society admired. With something deeper. The beauty of endurance. The beauty of surviving heartbreak without surrendering dignity. She stopped several feet away. "You wish to speak with me, Your Grace." The title cut deeper than any insult. Once she had spoken his name with affection. Now she addressed him like a stranger. The Duke folded his hands behind his back. "I wish to speak with my wife." Pain flashed across her face. Brief, sure. Then vanished. "I ceased being your wife 2 years ago." The words settled heavily between them. Outside the glass walls, snow drifted through the darkness. Inside, warmth from hidden furnaces fought against the winter. Yet neither felt warm. The Duke forced himself forward. "I have learned things that change everything." She laughed softly. Not with amusement. With bitterness. Dangerous words. They are true words. Truth arrived rather late. The remark struck home. He accepted it without protest. Because she was right. Every accusation she carried had been earned. She turned away from him. I spent 2 years wondering which part hurt most. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. The divorce. The humiliation. The gossip. Losing my home. She stared through the glass toward the snowy gardens. Or realizing how little faith my husband had in me. The Duke felt shame tighten around his chest. You believe strangers. She continued speaking. You believed forged letters. You believed whispers from people who despised me. Each sentence landed with painful precision. But you never believed me. The Duke lowered his gaze. There was no defense. No explanation sufficient to erase what he had done. At last he spoke quietly. I was wrong. She closed her eyes. A trembling breath escaped her. For years she had imagined hearing those words. Now that they finally came, they brought no immediate comfort. Only grief. The grief of everything they could not recover. The Duke reached into his coat and produced several folded documents. I know who destroyed our marriage. Her eyes widened slightly. He handed her the papers. One by one she read them. Evidence. Confessions. Financial transfers. Proof of manipulation. Proof of forgery. Proof of conspiracy. By the time she finished reading, her hands were shaking. Not because she doubted the evidence. Because she believed it. The truth stood undeniable before her. Everything she had suffered had been built upon lies. Tears gathered slowly. She blinked them away. The Duke stepped closer. They deceived us both. Silence followed. Long. Heavy. Then she looked at him. Not with anger. Not with forgiveness. With exhaustion. Do you know what happened after I left? He shook his head. No. A sad smile touched her lips. Of course you don't. She described the years that followed. The rented rooms. The loneliness. The doors closed in her face. The former friends who pretended not to recognize her. The endless whispers. The struggle to survive. Every word revealed wounds society could not see. The Duke listened without interruption. Each detail felt like another stone added to the burden of his guilt. Then she rested a hand against her stomach. Instinctively. Protectively. The movement drew both their eyes. The question that had haunted him for days returned. Neither could avoid it any longer. The Duke swallowed. His voice became barely audible. The child. She looked away. The silence stretched. Then stretched longer. Finally she answered. Yes. One word. Nothing more. Yet it changed everything. The Duke stared at her. His pulse thundered. The child is mine? Tears slipped down her cheeks. She nodded. I discovered the pregnancy after our separation. The world seemed to stop. Every sound vanished. Even the wind beyond the glass disappeared. For several moments he could only look at her. At the woman he had abandoned. At the mother of his child. At the life he had unknowingly lost. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. She laughed through tears. The sound broke his heart. Because you hated me. The simplicity of the answer was devastating. She had carried his child alone because she believed herself unwanted. Because he had convinced her of it. The Duke covered his eyes briefly. When he lowered his hand, emotion had stripped away every trace of aristocratic composure. If there is one sin I shall answer for before God, he said quietly, it is that I abandoned you when I should have protected you. The words hung between them. Raw. Honest. Unrehearsed. For the first time since entering the garden, her expression softened. Only slightly. But enough. Enough to reveal that beneath the pain something still lived. Not trust. Not forgiveness. Something smaller. A fragile possibility. Then suddenly her face drained of color. Her hand flew to her abdomen. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. The documents slipped from her fingers. The Duke lunged forward as her knees buckled beneath her. Panic exploded through him as he caught her before she struck the stone pathway. She clutched her stomach, trembling violently, her breathing uneven and strained. Fear flooded her eyes for the first time that evening. Not fear for herself. Fear for the child. The Duke gathered her against him, shouting for help as servants rushed toward the winter garden. But when he looked down he saw something that turned his blood cold. A physician arriving moments later took one glance at her condition and delivered words neither of them were prepared to hear. The pregnancy had become dangerously complicated. The physician's warning cast a shadow over Blackthorn Castle that no candlelight could dispel. Days passed beneath a veil of anxiety. The former Duchess remained confined to a private chamber overlooking the snow-covered gardens. Heavy velvet curtains softened the pale winter sunlight, while fires burned continuously against the cold. Physicians arrived at all hours. Medicines lined the bedside table. Servants moved quietly through the corridors. Yet despite every effort, uncertainty lingered. The pregnancy had become dangerously fragile. Stress and exhaustion had taken their toll. Any complication could prove devastating. The Duke heard those warnings repeatedly. He ignored everything else. Meetings were cancelled. Invitations declined. Estate matters delegated. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, rank and responsibility ceased to matter. Only one thing remained important. Her. Each morning he appeared outside her chamber. Each evening he remained until physicians forced him to rest. Sometimes she spoke with him. Sometimes she did not. He accepted both without complaint. Trust was not something he could demand. It was something he had destroyed. And if rebuilding it required patience, then patience would become his penance. One afternoon snow drifted gently beyond the windows while she sat near the fire wrapped in a wool blanket. A book rested unopened upon her lap. The Duke stood nearby. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence was no longer hostile, merely careful, like two people learning how to walk across shattered glass. Eventually she glanced toward him. "You needn't stay here every day." His answer came immediately. "Yes, I do." A faint sadness touched her expression. "You cannot undo the past." "No." His gaze remained fixed upon the flames. "But I can refuse to repeat it." The honesty of the reply lingered between them. She looked away first, not because she disliked hearing it, because she wanted to believe it, and that frightened her. Outside her room, however, society remained as cruel as ever. Rumors continued spreading through London. Newspapers hinted at scandal. Drawing rooms buzzed with speculation. Some claimed the Duke had lost his senses. Others insisted he intended to legitimize an illegitimate child. Several aristocratic families expressed outrage openly. Letters arrived daily. Most advised distance. Some demanded it. A few threatened social consequences. The Duke burned every one. Meanwhile, investigators completed their work. Evidence against those responsible for the conspiracy became overwhelming. Witnesses came forward. Financial records emerged. Forged documents were authenticated. The lies that had destroyed the marriage began collapsing beneath their own weight. Yet the Duke wanted more than private vindication. He wanted truth exposed publicly. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A prestigious winter gathering was scheduled at Blackthorn Castle. Influential nobles from across England would attend. Ministers, earls, dukes, powerful families who shaped society itself. Tradition demanded the event proceed. The Duke decided it would, but not for the reasons anyone expected. The evening arrived beneath clear skies glittering with frost. Carriages rolled through the castle gates. Guests filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Music floated through the air. Conversation echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. Everything appeared normal, until the Duke entered. He stood alone at the top of the grand staircase. Silence gradually spread through the room. People sensed something unusual immediately. The Duke was not smiling. He was not hosting. He was preparing. When every eye had turned toward him, he began speaking. His voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom. "I have allowed falsehoods to exist for too long." The room fell completely silent. No violin played. No glass clinked. Nothing interrupted him. "The woman many of you have discussed in whispers was once my wife." Murmurs stirred. He continued. "The child she carries is my child." The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Several women covered their mouths. Others stared openly. A few noblemen exchanged shocked glances. The Duke did not pause. "He is my heir." The words struck society like lightning. Everything changed in an instant. Inheritance, legacy, title, future. The Duke had publicly acknowledged the unborn child before England's elite. There could be no retreat from such a declaration. Yet he was not finished. He raised a hand. The murmurs ceased once more. Then attendants opened the ballroom doors. The former Duchess entered. A collective silence followed. She wore no servant's uniform. Nor did she wear extravagant jewels. Instead, she appeared in a simple but elegant gown of deep blue velvet. Dignified, graceful, unmistakably herself. Her pregnancy was visible. So was her nervousness. Hundreds of eyes followed her as she crossed the ballroom. The Duke descended the staircase. slowly, deliberately. Every step felt significant. When he reached her, the entire room watched. Nobody understood what would happen next. Not even her. Then the Duke did something unimaginable. Something that would be discussed for years. He knelt. There upon the polished marble floor. Before aristocrats. Before rivals. Before society itself. He lowered himself to one knee before the woman he had wronged. Shock rippled through the room. The former Duchess froze. Tears instantly filled her eyes. The Duke looked up at her. Not as a nobleman. Not as a master. As a man seeking forgiveness. His voice remained steady. Yet emotion trembled beneath every word. I once allowed the world to take you from me. The ballroom remained utterly silent. I shall not permit it a second time. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others blinked away tears. Even those who disliked her could not ignore the sincerity before them. The former Duchess stood motionless. Emotion overwhelmed her. For the first time since their separation, she saw not the proud Duke who had condemned her. She saw the man she had once loved. The man buried beneath years of mistakes. Moments later, the investigators presented their findings publicly. Documents were revealed. Witnesses spoke. The conspiracy was exposed completely. Every forged letter. Every bribe. Every deception. Truth finally stood where lies had once ruled. Her innocence became undeniable. The whispers died. The scandal collapsed. Justice had arrived at last. Yet as relief swept through the ballroom, a sudden expression crossed her face. Fear. Instant. Sure. One hand flew to her stomach. The color drained from her cheeks. The Duke rose immediately. She swayed. A painful gasp escaped her lips. The room erupted into alarm. Physicians rushed forward. The Duke caught her before she could fall. And as panic spread through the ballroom, one terrified realization settled over everyone present. The child had chosen that very moment to come. Chaos swept through Blackthorn Castle. The elegant ballroom that had moments earlier witnessed scandal, confession, and redemption now erupted into frantic motion. Guests stepped aside as physicians hurried forward. Servants rushed to clear a path. The former Duchess clutched her stomach, her face pale with pain, while the Duke held her firmly against him. Fear struck him with a force unlike anything he had ever known. Not fear of losing status. Not fear of losing reputation. Fear of losing her. Fear of losing their child. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms and carried her from the ballroom. The crowd parted in silence as he moved through the castle corridors. Her fingers gripped the front of his coat. Please, she whispered through a painful breath. I'm here, he said immediately. The words were simple. Yet for the first time in years he intended to prove them. Outside, winter winds battered the castle walls. Snow swirled across the dark grounds while clouds swallowed the moon. Nature itself seemed restless, as though the night understood the battle about to unfold. She was carried into a spacious chamber prepared by the physicians. The doors closed. The Duke was ordered outside. And then came the waiting. The longest hours of his life. He stood alone in the corridor while servants moved quietly around him. Occasionally a physician emerged to retrieve supplies. Occasionally muffled voices drifted through the heavy oak doors. Each sound tightened the knot in his chest. The Duke had faced political crises, financial disasters, threats against his estate. None of them compared to this helplessness. For the first time since boyhood, he found himself praying. Not for power. Not for success. Only for mercy. Hours passed. The castle grew quieter. Guests departed. Candles burned low. Still he remained outside her chamber. A servant eventually approached with food. The Duke refused it. Another brought coffee. He ignored it. Nothing mattered except the woman beyond those doors. As midnight deepened, memories returned to him. Their wedding day. The way she had laughed beneath a summer sky. The excitement in her eyes when they first entered Blackthorn Castle as husband and wife. The promises they had spoken. Promises he had failed to keep. Regret settled heavily upon him. He would have surrendered every title, every acre of land, every privilege inherited through generations if it meant erasing the pain he had caused her. But the past could not be changed. Only the future remained. And now even that future felt uncertain. Near dawn a cry echoed through the chamber. The Duke froze. Then another cry followed. Stronger. Clear. A newborn infant's cry. For a moment he could not breathe. The sound seemed almost unreal. The corridor blurred. Relief crashed through him so suddenly that he had to steady himself against the wall. The child had survived. Their child. Moments later a physician emerged. Exhaustion lined the man's face. "The baby lives, Your Grace." The Duke closed his eyes briefly. Emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "A son?" he asked. The physician nodded. "A healthy boy." For the first time in years, genuine joy entered the Duke's heart. Then he noticed the physician's hesitation. The joy vanished. And his mother? Silence. Only a few seconds. Yet it felt endless. "She remains very weak." Fear returned immediately. The physician explained that the birth had been difficult. The next hours would be critical. The former Duchess needed rest, strength, and time. Nothing more could be guaranteed. The Duke entered the room slowly. Morning light had not yet arrived. The chamber glowed softly beneath candlelight. A tiny infant slept in a cradle nearby. The sight nearly broke him. The child had his dark hair, her delicate features, a perfect combination of both. Yet his gaze quickly returned to the bed. She looked fragile, far too fragile. Her face appeared pale against the white pillows. Exhaustion shadowed her features. She remained unconscious. The Duke pulled a chair beside her bed. Then he sat. Hours passed. The castle gradually awakened beyond the windows. Snow continued falling. Fire crackled softly within the hearth. Still she did not stir. Eventually he took her hand. For years he had imagined what he might say if given another chance. Now the words came naturally. Not polished. Not rehearsed. Simply honest. "I was supposed to protect you." His voice remained quiet. "I failed." The infant slept peacefully nearby. The Duke looked toward his son before returning his gaze to her. "I believed lies because they were easier than trust." Pain tightened his throat. "I let pride speak louder than love." His fingers gently tightened around hers. "You deserved better than the man I became." Emotion filled the room. Raw. Unfiltered. "If you wake," he whispered, "I will spend the rest of my life proving that I have learned from that failure." Silence followed. Then another. The Duke lowered his head. For the first time in many years, tears filled his eyes. A sudden movement interrupted the stillness. Small. Barely noticeable. Her fingers moved within his grasp. The Duke looked up instantly. Slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. Confusion lingered there for a moment. Then recognition. The Duke stared at her. Unable to speak. Unable to move. A faint smile touched her lips. "Weak. Fragile. Beautiful." "You are crying," she whispered. A broken laugh escaped him. "Apparently I am." The tension that had imprisoned his heart finally shattered. She survived. The woman he loved survived. Weeks passed. Winter slowly softened its grip upon the countryside. The former Duchess recovered steadily. Their son grew stronger each day. And something unexpected began healing alongside them. Trust. Not all at once. Not magically. But gradually. Conversation returned. Laughter returned. Hope returned. The Duke remained patient. He no longer demanded forgiveness. Instead he earned it. One day at a time. One act at a time. When spring finally arrived, Blackthorn Castle hosted another grand gathering. The atmosphere felt entirely different from the night everything had changed. Fresh flowers decorated the halls. Sunlight poured through towering windows. Music drifted through the ballroom. Yet the greatest difference stood at the center of the room. The former servant entered not in a uniform, not in borrowed clothing, but in an elegant Duchess gown of deep sapphire silk. Jewels shimmered softly at her throat. Among them rested the silver wedding locket she had never removed. The room fell silent. Not from scandal. From admiration. The same people who had mocked her now bowed respectfully. The same society that had discarded her now watched in awe. She crossed the ballroom carrying her infant son, the future heir of Blackthorn Castle. The Duke met her at the center of the floor. For a moment neither spoke. They simply looked at one another. Two people who had endured betrayal, separation, loneliness, and heartbreak. Two people who had nearly lost everything. Then the Duke gently took her hand. His voice carried across the silent ballroom. "You were never my greatest mistake." Emotion shone within his eyes. Losing you was. Tears gathered in hers. This time she did not hide them. The Duke lifted their son's tiny hand between them. The child who had unknowingly reunited two broken hearts. The child who had brought truth into darkness. The child who had carried them home. And before all of England's watching eyes, the former Duchess leaned forward and kissed her husband once more. The ballroom erupted into applause. But neither heard it. Because after years of silence, misunderstanding, and pain, they had finally found something greater than pride. They had found each other again. And beneath the warm spring sunlight pouring through the castle windows, surrounded by family, hope, and the future they almost lost, their story ended not with scandal, but with love victorious at last.